Hello, and welcome to the Corporate Storytime podcast series. My name is Lucas Robinson, the host of the podcast. On this pod, I'll get the opportunity to talk to ASX company leaders and innovators as they run through their personal executive journeys and the stories behind the companies they are helping to grow today. I'll be leveraging my experience as a former stockbroker and my current role with investor relations consultancy, Corporate Storytime. But enough of that. For now, let's gather round, come in close, and let me tell you a story. Hello, and thanks for tuning into the Corporate Storytime podcast. Today, I'm joined by Great Boulder Resources Managing Director, Andrew Paterson. Great Boulder trades under the ASX code GBR and is advancing the Sidewell Gold Project near Meekatharra in WA. The company aims to build a standalone gold mining asset at Sidewell, which is located less than 25 kilometres from Westgold's Bluebird gold processing mill. Andrew joined me last for a chat a bit over a year ago. In that time, Great Boulder has expanded its project footprint in the Paterson region and completed successful metallurgical studies and drilling campaigns. Andrew, thanks for joining me for the chat. Can you start by explaining the significance of Meekatharra as a gold-producing district? What is the production history in the region and what sort of gold industry exists in the region today?
Yeah, thanks, Lucas. Yeah, absolutely. So Meekatharra is one of the historic gold fields in the Murchison region. So if you look at the process of the discovery of gold in the very early days of Western Australia, the early prospectors actually came around through the top end and they found some of the Kimberley fields like Halls Creek fairly early on, and then slowly worked their way down and opening up areas like Mount Magnet with the gold discovery at Paddy's Flat, then moving down through Nanine, Mount Magnet, and eventually round to Kalgoorlie and obviously the Golden Mile down there. So it's quite an interesting history. It means there has been gold mining in Meekatharra for well over 100 years now. And in fact, the Paddy's Flat area, the discovery field, has produced, multi-million ounces of gold. I don't have the exact figure, but it's a very significant amount of gold ounces. And it means that there are big mines in the area, and Paddy's Flat being one and Bluebird being another. These are mines that have produced, respectively, over 1 million ounces each, and with more than 1 million ounces in resource. So these are pretty big areas, which are really quite local to our project. The interesting thing about Sidewell in that context is that even though we're actually abutting Westgold's tenements, a lot of these areas have never been explored or have hardly ever been explored. There was enough drilling, for example, at Mulga Bill to get us interested in the project, but really, in the scheme of things, only a few drill holes with what you would call ore-grade intersections in them. And other areas that we've since tested have never been drilled before at all. So it's quite an interesting contrast. We've got kind of a 120-year-old gold field on one side of Meekatharra and unexplored targets a few kilometres away on the other. And so that's where we're at. We've really started opening up a whole new area, making new discoveries, and we think well on the way to, I guess, rewriting some of that Meekatharra history.
Perfect. So what year did you acquire the project? And I know that at the moment the mineral resource estimate stands at around 668,000 ounces of gold at 2.8 grams per tonne. How did you get there? Over what period of time, and where do you see it going over the course of the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, we first acquired the option to explore Sidewell in around the middle of 2020, so right during COVID. It was a pretty quiet time. We had been exploring around Kalgoorlie at the Whiteheads project and just prior to that out east of Laverton looking for nickel copper sulfide projects. And so we were at a kind of a pivotal stage in the company's evolution where we were looking to move into more of a gold focus. And basically COVID, strangely enough, gave us the opportunity to do desktop reviews of just about every available gold project in Western Australia, and we looked at dozens at a very high level just on the mines department information database, and we identified sidewell fairly early because it was held by our existing joint venture partner, Scott Wilson. And we thought, well, that kind of looks intriguing. But we put it to one side while we went off and spent another month or two looking at other things, and eventually came back to Sidewell and did the deal. And we started drilling there in August 2020. And the first thing we realised was it was a bit more complicated than we realised. Than we expected. So we did this kind of standard thing and drilled near existing holes and came up with quite different results. Came up with deep weathering, some multi-element profiles. So, for example, we identified copper there in the first few holes. Identified some interesting things in the chemistry, for example, elevated bismuth. And we didn't really know what all of that meant. So we decided to not get ahead of ourselves and go back to square one and start doing air core drilling to work out exactly what we were dealing with. And after quite a bit of air core drilling and quite a bit of help with the geochemistry from Scott Halley, we realised that we were onto something that looked quite big, and it looked like an intrusive related system, and it was quite extensive, which actually made the RC targeting even harder because we were dealing with something that existed over multiple kilometres rather than just discrete targets. Long story short, we put a lot of air core data into our next targeting and didn't drill there with RC again until early in 2021. And that program, I think on the second hole, we hit a high-grade intersection of about 30 grams a tonne over something like 5 metres in hole 002. And so we thought really, we had it nailed. So we thought, well, this is obviously a steep dipping tabular ore body, and we've hit it in 2 holes out of 3, so we know what's going on. As it turned out, we're actually drilling back to front. We'd hit 2 different ore intersections. It's just coincidence that they happened to line up one underneath the other. We were drilling entirely the wrong way. It took us a long time to work out the geometry, turned the rig around and drilled back in the opposite direction, from west to east instead of from east to west. And once we did that, and that was, again, another year or so later, that's when things really started to fall into place. Since that time, we've been able to plan drill holes and intersect high-grade mineralisation with fairly good certainty, fairly good confidence, and start putting this resource together. It's now, as you said, 668,000 ounces, of which 100,000 exactly is at Ironbark and everything else is at Mulga Bill. And Mulga Bill and the northern extension, which we're now calling Eagle Hawk, really looks like being the engine room of a future mining operation. So we can see potential there, certainly in terms of the real estate that we've got. There's certainly scope for 1 million ounces at the Mulga Bill Eagle Hawk deposit. And we're also still defining other targets which look very much like the Ironbark type signature down the eastern side of the project. So our target of 1 million ounces this year and an aspiration of 1.5 million ounces are looking really quite good as we sit here today.
Very good. Oh, it sounds like there's been some eureka moments and then some head-scratching moments, and now the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are sort of all starting to fall into place. Building the resource inventory is one thing, but you had some very encouraging news in relation to metallurgical recoveries from Mulga Bill earlier this year. Can you just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So getting back to that kind of polymetallic nature to Mulga Bill, the biggest kind of alarm bell there potentially was always the fact that there's copper mineralisation in association with the gold. And the reason for that is that copper can be quite a problem with cyanide leaching. So basically a cyanide plant process uses the cyanide to dissolve gold so that you can extract it from the waste material. You then reprecipitate the gold and create gold bars. Long story short, the problem with copper is that the copper can be dissolved by the cyanide preferentially so that you gobble up all your cyanide and the gold goes straight out to the tailings dam and you don't recover any of it. So obviously we needed to understand that, and we did the MET testing. What that concluded was that the amount of copper that's actually soluble by cyanide is very low, and therefore that wasn't a problem with the cyanide consumption. And secondly, the gold actually leaches really well, and in fact performed a lot better than we expected. So not only that we get high recoveries, but it also leaches quite fast. It wasn't grind size dependent, so we can use quite a coarse grind size. You can put it through the tanks fairly quickly, leach it for about 8 to 10 hours to get it into the high 90% recovery rate. And what that means in turn is that this ore product is something that could go through anybody's mill and probably actually improve their overall mill performance. So it's a really attractive product.
Yeah, that's a huge de-risking event. I know that the company was, greatly relieved to get results that were that positive from those metallurgical tests. I know that ironbark is there's currently a mining application that's been submitted for ironbark. What's the strategy behind that?
Yeah, so this is something we've actually had in the pipeline for about 18 months. It's quite a slow process getting a mining lease granted. So the strategy is essentially to negotiate a mining agreement with the traditional owners, the Yuganya people, and that will allow this mining lease to get granted. And then that in turn opens up opportunities, a number of opportunities for what to do with ironbark. So early on, we said we were reluctant to deal on ironbark independently because we saw it as a strategic asset for early stage cash flow while we were opening up Mulga Bill. Now, that still may be the case, but we're considering other options as well. And that, for example, might involve us mining it and toll treating it at one of the neighbours' plants, or it might involve us selling it to one of the neighbours. And that's potentially quite a valuable asset and therefore an opportunity for non-dilutive funding. So basically raising money without having to issue more shares, which is obviously something which is important to our shareholders because they've come along for the ride and supported the company for several years. And so the more we can do with the less new capital, the better. So we're really, just in the last few months in particular, we've really sharpened our focus on what opportunities there are for that kind of early stage cash flow opportunity. In terms of talking to all the companies in the area to sense what the appetite is like for toll treatment, and pushing forward with those negotiations on the mining lease as soon as we can. So, in terms of timelines, we still don't know exactly how long this is going to take. It's one of those things, how long is a piece of string? Ultimately, it comes down to us reaching an agreement with the traditional owner group. The relationship there is good, so I don't foresee any particular problems with that happening, but it is just quite a slow process. And unfortunately, there's not a hell of a lot we can do to accelerate that. We can certainly communicate our intention to the TO group, but at the end of the day, they control the timeline. So we will sit down with them as soon as possible and discuss the specifics of what a mining agreement may look like, and then hopefully come to an agreement sooner rather than later. Once that's done, then we can get the mining lease granted, and we will also be slotting future mining leases into the same agreement. So Mulga Bill is an obvious one. Saltbush would be pretty easy. Eagle Hawk is a bit more variable because we don't know yet where the northern end of it is. So we would like to wrap the mining lease around the whole thing. And anything else that comes along, for example, down at Sidewell South, we think we're probably onto some interesting discoveries down there as well. So all of these things will start to flow through in the second half of the year.
Only to keep you busy. And it's a really good time to be talking about monetising gold assets with the price of the commodity just going through the roof. You mentioned a couple of the prospects there, Eagle Hawk, which was previously known as Mulga Bill North, and Saltbush, along with the continued activity at Mulga Bill. What can people expect to see in terms of news flow in relation to drilling over the course of the next couple of months?
Yeah, so there'll be really a continuous stream of news flow coming through from drill results, and right now we're collating assay information from the RC drilling at Eagle Hawk and Mulga Bill, and those results are still coming through, so we should have an update on them in the next week or so. Then the next program, which is currently underway, is air core drilling on the target horizon at Eaglehawk, which is this dacite unit that we've been talking about is really the key exploration target there. So we're putting in more air core drilling to refine the exact position of that target. So there should be information coming into the market about that. Then when that's wrapped up, we recently got approval to drill some more holes down the south end of Ironbark, which we haven't drilled for a year or so. And there's just a couple of boxes to tick at the south end of Ironbark just to make sure we know exactly what's going on. We'll do some RC drilling there and then probably head down to Sidewell South and do some infill drilling on those recent discoveries. There's going to be a lot of ongoing news flow. That's just on the exploration side. Also in the background, we've got ongoing network on Mulga Bill looking at optimizing cyanide consumption on that. And we will also do some detailed network on Ironbark. And in fact, this RC drilling may give us more sample material to do some met testing on Ironbark. We're also looking at as I said before, any strategic opportunities that may be available, and I don't have any detail on those at the moment, but suffice to say that we're kind of trying to push all the opportunities at the moment to see what we can shake loose. So we're quite happy with the footprint of our project at the moment. We're not looking to acquire more prospecting leases or general acreage. We're really focusing in on what sort of near to medium term opportunities there are for non-dilutive cash flow.
I know you've over the years built a really strong technical team with Dan Duran as the exploration manager at the company, but you recently announced some appointments to a technical advisory panel. Can you say who is on that panel and what they bring to the table?
Yeah, so the advisory panel is part of this, I suppose, defining this renewed focus on development, and so hence the appointment of an experienced mining engineer and an experienced metallurgist are really quite key in that area. So we've had the advisory panel informally for quite a long time, and it has all been geoscience based, which has added a heap of value to our exploration process. But now we're really bringing in the mining skills, essentially mining and project development, and that's where Peter and Natalia come on board. So it's still an informal panel, and there's no kind of set remuneration for the people who are on it. But when we engage any of them individually in their professional respects, then we pay them according to their normal remuneration. What it means is that the board, who are still geology focused, with no disrespect to Karen O'Neill, who's our commercial and finance person, but really, if you look at the board, there's 3 geos and Karen, and so I think it's quite appropriate to broaden our kind of experience base by bringing in an advisory panel in this regard. It really gives the board a hell of a lot more firepower in terms of understanding some of these kind of project development aspects. And Peter in particular has experience in the Meekatharra areas, having been chairman of Dore Minerals up until it was acquired by Silver Lake. So he's actually got hands-on experience at Andy Well, just to the north of us. And so he understands some of the regional dynamics as well. And I think both of them will add heaps of value to the company as we move forward.
Perfect. Well, I mean, it sounds as if Great Boulder's well on the way to a 1.5 million ounce mineral resource estimate and possibly well beyond that, with the appropriate permitting processes, well at hand and during a period of record gold prices. So you're in a pretty good spot. Is there anything you want to say to sort of sign off?
Yeah, it is. It's a really interesting time, and it's an interesting dynamic. I mean, the gold space has been pretty quiet for the last 2 or 3 years, and all of a sudden it's red hot, which is fantastic. And now that really underlines the fact that advanced explorers like Great Boulder generally are hugely undervalued, and so there's a gap in value between us and the near-term producers, which is something that I want to fill in as soon as we can. It potentially makes Great Boulder vulnerable in an M&A sense. One of our bigger neighbours could come and gobble us up anytime they want, and we're really working as hard as we can to demonstrate that value as quick as we can. So I think it's going to be a really exciting year. And I know I've said that before, and it has always been an exciting kind of process, but now it's time to put the value behind it and really demonstrate that to the market. So that's what we're working on at the moment.
Good man. Well, keep going. You've done a great job in the company so far, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where you take it over the course of the next year or two.
Me too. Thanks very much, mate.
Pleasure. Thank you for listening to the Corporate Storytime podcast. We're really trying to build our audience for the podcast and aim to deliver regular episodes of our chats with executives from some of the ASX's most interesting companies. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends, follow the podcast and give us a like wherever you download it. And if you have any feedback, please drop us a line at info@corporatestorytime.com. Thanks and all the best.